I bought an RX 6800 XT when I actually kind of wanted an RTX 3080. Did I make a huge mistake, especially for 4K on my 4K OLED over there? Review incoming. I've been saying that for weeks now. It'll happen, guys. Quick channel note. I'm a high school teacher and the school year's starting, so release schedule will be slowing down a bit, but I imagine I can still get at least one or more videos every week and all of that. Anyway, RX 6800 XT specifically, this will be a review of the Tough Gaming OC version from Asus, because that's the one I managed to get at a reasonable price. Well, at least not scalped by a third party. Anyway, how does it actually do at 4K? Do I regret the decision? Let's jump into some gameplay, and then I'll give you my conclusion and final thoughts at the end. Red Dead Redemption 2 was the very first game that I wanted to experience in glorious 4K on my new 4K OLED TV, review incoming, and my new RX 6800 XT graphics card. And as you can see here, even with everything slid over to favor quality, that maximum preset in the menu, occasionally a dip slightly below 60, but also a little above 60 much of the time, and this feels very smooth. Again, with the variable refresh rate monitor, you're not gonna feel much of a difference between 58 for a second and 62. So this feels very, very good, but it's not the most optimized game. What if we try the hardware unboxed? Optimized settings, although I turned up the lighting quality so you wouldn't get those dips at night, and now it's absolutely buttery smooth, and I would argue still looks absolutely beautiful. I think it's worth the trade-off for the jump in frame rate if you have a monitor that can go above 60. And, here we are in the 90s some of the time. Our average is around 86. The minimums are still above 60. You can look at all that in the top left. And I think this plays absolutely beautifully. I've been leaning towards these optimized settings playing it myself, but again, like I said, you can still average around 60 with everything completely maxed out. But what about some other games? Let's jump over to what's been possibly my favorite game of the year, Resident Evil Village. This game is also very well optimized and I think looks really, really nice. And this is the game at its maximum preset, which does not include ray tracing. We will test that out in just a second. But at this preset, and we'll get into a little bit of combat here so we can see if it drops. Hint, it doesn't. We've got our minimums above 90, and our average is often above the 100, near the 100, and our current frame rates will often be over the 120 hertz limit of my monitor. So this game plays beautifully at 4K maximum presets. And man, can I just say enough just how good this game looks in my opinion. And yeah, I'm really loving this one at 4K on my glorious OLED. The blacks in the game look really good on OLED. Did I mention you guys should buy an OLED? Wait for my review, wait for the review. But anyway, let's kick ray tracing on. Hey look, our frame rates are actually still pretty good. We're well above 60 all the time. I mean, we're above 60 even in the 1% lows. Our average is well above 60 in this same scene. Everything still feels great. So unless for some reason you feel like you need 120 frames per second, I think you might as well kick on the ray tracing. Even if you're not that into ray tracing, might as well kick it on. You've got excellent frame rates here. And again, this is not the ray tracing preset, which lowers a lot of the graphic settings. This is the maximum preset, and then with all the ray tracing settings turned on. And so in games that are programmed to have a reasonable demand on ray tracing, like this one, you can still get great ray tracing performance, although it's definitely not going to be true in a lot of other games. Let's hop over to the Ascent, which is a lesser known title, but one of my personal favorites of the year. And hey, look, maxed out without ray tracing in a fairly demanding area, we are still well above 60 frames per second. Things are looking great. Did I mention I love this game and it's still really buggy, but it might be worth checking out. But let's turn on ray tracing. Yuck, our frame rates are horrible here. So what can we do? We don't have DLSS. We could try some resolution scaling to get above the 17 frames per second we're getting right now. And so let's try like a 75% resolution scale and see what that does. At 75%, we get near 30 frames per second. You get, hey, better reflections in the in the puddles. I don't know if it's worth it, man. But there you go. Now, we could try to drop even lower to something like 50% resolution scale, which I think, if I understand that correctly, it's bringing it down to 1080p basically, because it's cutting each dimension in half, which half of a half of, is a fourth. So we're at a fourth of the pixels, 50% resolution scale. And if you're watching this on a 1080p screen, you might still think it looks great, but at, on a 4K screen, you can definitely tell that this is not super sharp. I wouldn't go this low. My overall conclusion in this game is the game is beautiful without ray tracing. It would be cool to have the little water reflections and stuff that you can get on your RTX card a little easier with DLSS, but you know what? I think the game looks absolutely gorgeous. Did I mention that? This game looks really nice. Very buggy right now, though. Hopefully after a few patches, we'll be doing better. Let's hop over to another game I really enjoy. This is Ori and the Will of the Wisps, and game absolutely maxed out, runs super smoothly, and in my opinion, this game is utterly gorgeous. Now, I don't have the HDR turned on right now for issues involving recording it, and you guys probably not having good HDR displays and all of that. But this game looks amazing on the OLED HDR, by the way. Like, wow, stunning. Anyway, highly recommend this game, and it runs beautifully on the RX 6800 XT. Let's jump over to another game. Shadow of the Tomb Raider is still very useful for benchmarking and still quite demanding, despite being a couple years old at this point. And can we max it out? Yes, and still get well above 60, often into the 70s frames per second here. Ignore the 1% lows in the average because I forgot to reset that after exiting the menu. But anyway, yeah, plays beautifully maxed out. You might like it maxed out. Does it have ray tracing? Well, kick on ray tracing medium and it still runs okay, but I'd argue in this game ray tracing is kind of pointless. I don't really notice the ray traced shadows at all myself. I don't know about you. And if you kick it up to ultra shadows ray tracing, the frame rate really does kind of tank. It's playable, but like I said, I don't see the visual appeal here. Let's jump over to another game. Forza Horizon 4 is a little bit older and is very well optimized. And you'll notice that this thing would be pushing past a 144 hertz refresh rate monitor. Mine's 120 and we're well above that. I've never seen it drop below that. We're also not, you have to look at the top right here because for some reason Afterburner didn't work. Anyway, on Witcher. So Witcher's a little bit older as well, but used to be your super demanding, great looking benchmark game a few years ago, and you can definitely max this thing out completely and be well into the 80 frames per second range, completely maxed out. So older games, yeah, you can max them out at 4K, absolutely no problem. But how about Cyberpunk? Cyberpunk is brutal and is just not a well-optimized game. It does look good, but man, 4K max preset is dropping us into the 30s. This is a fairly demanding scene, so you do better in some other scenes. We don't have DLSS to help out. To be fair, even a 3090 gets crushed here without DLSS and would not be getting a smooth 60 in all these scenes. So let's try dropping down to high and see how we do. So at high presets, we're doing much better. This would be pretty playable in the mid 40s, especially with variable refresh rate, but I'd prefer to be at 60. There's a couple ways to get there. You could drop down to medium, which we'll take a look at right here, and medium does get us into the 60s, even in a demanding scene like this. Did I mention a lot of scenes run much better than this one? I chose a demanding one on purpose. But yeah, you can get, and medium still looks pretty good. There's other ways to get there. If you'd rather still be at high settings, you could also try dropping the resolution scale. So like an 80% resolution scale at high preset, we're up into the mid or upper 60s, even a demanding scene like this. But what about ray tracing? Yeah, you really just shouldn't try ray tracing on this game, especially on an AMD card. But if you do, hey look, here's some reflections turned on. Hey, we have neat reflections and our frame rate's down in the 20s. This is the high preset. What can we do? Well, you actually can't activate resolution scaling for some reason. It's just incompatible with ray tracing. But we could actually just lower the render resolution of the game directly, go down to 1800p, and leave it at the high preset with some ray tracing. You might argue it's sort of playable around 30, but this is not how I'd recommend playing the game. So Cyberpunk, we can definitely get to reasonable and good-looking settings, and it's playable, but you know, this is one of the less impressive games. Let's jump into my final conclusion about this GPU. So do I regret getting the 6800 XT, not getting the 3080? Well, had they been at the same price, or even within about $50 of each other, I think I still would prefer the 3080, mainly due to having the DLSS support and better ray tracing. As we saw in some games, that really is a limitation on this card. Now, do I care that much about that? No, I think it was still delivering fantastic performance. Cyberpunk's a bit of a fluke, but we could still get great looking gameplay with a few tweaks to the settings. So I'm very, very happy with this. And at the prices I could actually find them at in stock, I got this for $1,200 and I would have had to pay $1,700 or more for an RTX 3080. Or, you know, when I won the Newegg Shuffle and could have got a 3070 Ti bundled with a useless case for like $1,300. I'm very happy for the prices that I had available to grab one of these. But like I said, if you had them at equal price, the main thing is you get the 16 gigabytes of VRAM here, which you could argue in the future could be a big deal for 4K gaming, but right now it isn't. So if I'm making the recommendation for right now, yeah, about the same price, grab yourself a 3080, that's what I would have done, but overall, are you gonna be disappointed with the 6800 XT? I don't think so. I think it's fantastic. I'm very, very happy with this. Also, as a side note, I was a little concerned about the NVENC encoder not being here. The gameplay that you saw recorded today was all recorded using this hardware encoder from AMD. I used the, I think it's 70 megabit per second setting. Looking back at some of the footage, I think I wish I had bumped up that megabit per second a little bit higher. And I'm overall happy with the NVENC encoder on this. Sorry, not NVENC encoder. I'm overall happy with the encoder on here, even though it's not NVENC. I think NVENC can get you better results at the same bit rate, but if you push the bit rate a bit higher on this one, you can still do a good job, which doesn't matter unless you're live streaming. So something to think about, but I don't think that's going to be that big of a deal for most people. And I've had absolutely zero driver issues, and so far from what I've been able to play with, I actually really like the Radeon software. It seems to have a bunch of features available that I want to test out more, and I might even do some future videos testing out the Radeon software features. And by the way, this was all done with the stock overclock on this thing, which was performing really well. A lot of times it was around 2350 up to maybe even 2400 megahertz in games, and seems to hold that stably with no issues. All right, I'm gonna quit rambling. Expect my 4K OLED TV as a monitor review coming out sometime in the next week or two, hopefully, and I hope all of you guys have an excellent day.